Well, here we are. I am feeling really full right now. This is just so fun. This is like what I do for fun in my free time and talk about these things, and revisiting these episodes specifically has just felt really cool to go back to something. I remember actually the first time after I listened to these episodes, getting dinner with my parents at Chewy's, which if you've never been to Chewy's, you have to go. Please get creamy jalapeno. Creamy jalapeno is maybe my favorite food. Tangent. We were getting dinner, and I think I just talked to them about these episodes for the entire hour and a half that we were sitting in this Tex-Mex restaurant. So thank you, if you are here listening and watching, for coming along with me on this journey for these first two episodes. To dive a little bit more into where I'm at in my spiritual journey, I would recommend, if you haven't listened to the first episode, to go listen to that, because that gets into a bit more details about the actual kind of timeline for me. And I know I've kind of jumped around throughout it. So if y'all want a more condensed, precise, specific, I'll call it reconstruction story for me, let me know. I'd be happy to do something like that. I think that that would be, similarly to what Link said at the very beginning of this episode, really beneficial for me to kind of revisit that and create something with a narrative behind it to present. I think would be really, really fascinating and a good growth exercise. So maybe I'll do it anyways. Whether or not you want to see it, it'll be out there. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But for me right now, I don't think I really have a label like hopeful agnostic or hopefully hopeful agnostic. For a really long time, I called myself agnostic, and I think from the outside looking in, that's probably the best label for it. But there's this quote that Rhett actually now is quoted a couple times, and I'm forgetting who said it originally, but it is, "I will live and die on this fence." Actually, let me Google it real quick. Okay, that's really crazy actually, because I could have sworn that Rhett said that this was a quote about someone that he listened to about spirituality, but everything that comes up when you Google it is Psalm 118:17. "I will not die, but I will live and proclaim what the Lord has done." Really fascinating. Maybe it's a Rhett-ism, and I just assumed that he was quoting someone, or I misremembered that. But anyways, I've heard him say, "I will live and die on this fence between theism and atheism," and I think that there's something really beautiful in that. And what I would say is that I've kind of chopped up the fence and cooked it into a souffle. Or for me, pancakes. I've cooked it into some delicious fence pancakes, and I want to take a bite every day, in the sense that I don't just want to sit on it. And I don't think that's what anyone who says this, or Rhett specifically, is intending by this. I think the reason why I feel called to kind of add to this metaphor is that I want to encapsulate a little bit what Link was saying about doing the work, the active work of spirituality, of curiosity, of staying open. And I think that's what this feels like, to take a bite of the fence every day and to digest it, to really chew it, to digest it and to process it, right? There is something powerful in thinking about the work of that. And that's what I believe in. I believe in the work of this. In some more specificity about how do I define my higher power, my God. I tend to call God source. There is something about the language of God that feels very Christian to me, feels Abrahamic, and I think that calls up a lot of associations for a lot of people, myself included, and so source feels a little more accessible to me right now. I think I also like, anytime I say God, to use they them pronouns, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, or she her. I posted an Instagram post in the caption from a trip to Japan that I took, and the caption was, "God is a woman and I found her in Japan." And a few people asked me, why are you saying God is a woman? And I typed out my response and sent it. And it was like, look, I think God actually is probably non-binary, but there is something in me that likes pushing that button just a little bit to make people think, why do you raise your eyebrows at me saying God is a woman, but you never would at someone saying God is a man? There's something I like about pushing that envelope just a little bit. feels like safe rebellion to me, I think. So I tend to use the word source, but within source, I also like that can talk about our parents. That can talk about our inception, right? It also talks about ancestry and DNA to me. And these are all things that I find to be deeply spiritual. As someone who has anxiety and OCD, I've been in therapy since I was 12. And those experiences, the experience of my mental health and growing and working on that and through that has been a really big part of my self-growth and coming to know myself and understand myself and what does healing mean to me and how can healing actually be a spiritual experience. And then when you bring that into therapy, what does that mean and what does that look like? Thinking about all of that in the context of why am I here? We know that mental health and plenty of other things are genetic. Both of my parents also have their own experiences with mental health that, makes sense why I have the diagnoses that I do. And ancestrally, I did 23andMe a while ago, and it taught me a lot about my genetics. And it was interesting the way that there are things that you can predict about yourself. And so there is something that I am sourced from in DNA. There is something about me that was derived from that. I also think that, we know scientifically that ancestry does carry trauma through an ancestral line. There was a study done with mice. I'll try and link it down below. So we know that ancestral trauma is real. That happens scientifically, genetically. I think there's also a really interesting spiritual element to ancestral trauma and the ancestral line of, for instance, witches and the women that were persecuted in the Salem witch trials and other religious persecution of women throughout history is something that I've always been very fascinated by. And as I've explored occultism and witchcraft and these different, people call them new agey, but they're actually old agey traditions, it's been very fascinating to me about why am I so drawn to this? And I think that also feels very much like source to me. I'll also pull in from the scientific realm quantum physics. I'm not an expert by any means, but the things that I do know is that everything is made of atoms, right? And this table, my laptop, this microphone, me, are all made of tiny particles that are moving around extremely, extremely quickly. So quickly, in fact, that it's actually not really a solid object. It is moving around so fast next to other atoms that it gives our brains the illusion that it is a solid object. That means when I am touching this microphone, I am actually not really touching the microphone because my hand is actually a material and the microphone is actually a material. But also, they're trading atoms right now when they're in proximity. How does that freaking work? It's insane, right? But they are. We're slightly trading atoms. And energy is shared like this across sentient and non-sentient things. And we also know that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It has to come from somewhere. There is a source. And in that way, I do believe that I am made up of the same stuff as the stars. I am made of star stuff, right? At some point, the energy that is moving around so quickly in the form of atoms to make up my body and to make up my DNA is the same energy that is moving around so quickly to make up the sun, the moon, the stars, our solar system. I think there's a lot of things here to be drawn about the Big Bang as well, with energy not being created or destroyed. This is something I'm kind of tossing around within my own brain right now and would love any research recommendations anyone has. But the Big Bang can't really have ever ended and also can't really have ever started. And if that's true, is everything just happening all at once, everything everywhere all at once, but our brains are processing it in a linear experience? I don't know. Time and materialism is very odd within this concept, but I'll throw that out as a big question mark I have within all of this. There's also the concept of a gyre, Gyre, and a gyre is a shape, a vortex shape. that stacks on top of itself, on bottom of itself, and in a three-dimensional shape. A gyre is the shape of the double helix of our DNA. It is also the same shape of the pattern that the planets make in our solar system. On a microscopic level and a macroscopic level, energy is moving in a gyre. There's just something so fascinating about that to me. And when we think of things atomically, break it down to energy, I go back to this idea of Arthur C. Clarke's third law: any sufficient science is indistinguishable from magic. That feels like magic to me. The fact that the planets in our solar system and my DNA create the exact same shape, and that I am actually non-material. I'm atoms that are moving so quickly that they feel solid. That's magic. That's not real. But it is. It's science. Forgive me for any misstatements as well. I am not a scientist. I am a researcher. I do my best to understand these concepts, but I'm a writer and life coach by trade, so I really like to deal more in language when I communicate these things. So if I slightly misrepresent or misstate things, I appreciate your grace on that front. But that feels like magic, and yet we know it's scientifically true. So now we bring in this idea of God. If something has to be provable, but also not provable, because we need to have faith to believe in something that cannot be proven. That feels like all of these theories to me, like the fact of the gyre, the fact that atoms are just energy, that nothing is physical, but that nothing can be created or destroyed. It's like all of these things together make up this concept of God in my mind. I think also to the philosophical idea of the immovable mover. If something has to have always been here because energy cannot be created or destroyed, I tend to kind of think that God is the Big Bang. And the reason why we all feel this sensus divinitas is because we are a part of God. Jorge Luis Borges calls human beings fingertips of God's existence. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think everything, I'm like looking at my bedroom right now, everything is made up of God's stuff. And when we boil it down, it's immaterial. It's unproven. And yet, those are the things that have always existed because this energy was not created and will not be destroyed. So is that science? Is that spirituality? It's source. That's what it is to me. And so I think some people would listen to me talk about this and say, well, yeah, you're an atheist. You don't believe in Sky Daddy. You don't believe in a religion. You don't believe in a higher power. And then other people would look at that and say, well, there's something magical that you're adding to the science. Like, you're not actually a materialist. You believe something else is arising out of this. And to both of those, I say, yeah. And that's why I want to bake the fence into pancakes. Because I don't even really feel comfortable sitting on the fence. I think that atheism, theism, and agnosticism actually creates this weird Venn diagram, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Whatever truth actually is, I do believe in the light bulb. I do believe in wanting to experience it, and I do believe that the human experience is a part of the bigger picture. I also will throw out there that I do practice some witchcrafty things. I do consider myself to be a witch. That is a deep part of my spiritual practice. When you hold the belief that I do, that everything is energy and kind of has its own energetic signature, crystals start to make a lot of sense. Sage and herbs and Palo Santo start to make a lot of sense because, of course, when you burn something or you hold something close, it gives you a feeling. It elicits a different energetic response in your cells, in your atoms. You start to believe in sound bowls and sound healing and sound therapy. And that science starts to make a lot of sense because if my atoms are just vibrating at a certain frequency, as is everything else, you're going to find people who vibrate at that same frequency. You're going to hear sounds that vibrate at that frequency, and sounds want to meet each other in frequency. So if I'm exposed to sound bowls, my cells are going to start vibrating differently. And if I hold a rose quartz in my hand is going to start to feel that energy as the quartz in my hand trade atoms with one another somehow, magically and scientifically. Again, I've mentioned tarot a few times in this, and I think that that's something that any worldview can be mapped onto. Any belief in higher power is strong enough to speak to you through cards, obviously. But also, even if tarot, astrology, insert any esoteric practice here, or metaphysical practice here, even if it is just psychology and your brain making something out of it, that is still a tool for self-growth. Even if it's you making your own meaning out of it, we make our own meaning out of everything anyways. Why not have a practice that is fun, that feels sacred to you, that can help you with your growth? It's the same thing as reading self-help. It's the same thing as reading the Bible. It is something that is triggering thought. And if it is something that is bringing you closer to what feels truth, that what rings to truth, that is the frequency of truth to you, I say do it. I say go for it, and don't judge what someone else is doing unless they are hurting themselves or others. Or I guess, unless they are hurting others. I do think it's kind of your right to, I don't want anyone to hurt themselves. I do think it's kind of your right to do that, but okay. Tangent, different thing, Reese. Within all of that as well, different energies, witchcraft, the idea of like deities and ghosts gets in here too, and then we also have the idea of like angels and demons. Then you add in different literary ideas that come into play with holy texts, and life becomes this beautiful melting pot of meaning. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm trying to do the work of seeing the divinity in everything, and not taking myself too seriously. I do believe that God is in everything, and I think that that makes me a better person. I think it makes me treat other people, animals, and entities and things better, sentient or not. I think it makes me kinder. It also makes me more honest, and not just nice, but kind. Being able to hold both scientific beliefs and spiritual beliefs is deeply empowering for me. And I also, similarly to Rhett and Link, want to do the work to stay open, to stay curious. I think curiosity is a deeply spiritual practice for me. When you start to see everything as divine, everything feels sacred. Reading a shitty romance novel feels sacred, and listening to a comedy podcast feels sacred. Drinking a can of Coke feels sacred. And also, the things that we know are sacred feel so precious. My best friend's smiles, hugging my mom, moving halfway across the world, being here at all with this awareness and consciousness. It's mind-bogglingly beautiful in a terrifying sense. It is like the sublime experience of being a human being. And so I'm trying to carry that into everything I do and every interaction I have, because I think it makes me better, like I was saying. And it also gives me drive. It gives me focus. And it gives me a purpose to help other people find what gives them this feeling too. This feeling of sanctity, of being a sacred being and treating everything else as sacred. And then, of course, you fall down the rabbit hole of if everything is sacred, then nothing is sacred. And then I say, yes, everything is sacred because we make it so. And I get to make meaning out of that. And that's kind of how I've been making meaning. I jumble up a bunch of different things and go with it. One practice I'll share with you that I really, really enjoy as well is what I call making your own Bible. This is something I've done. I'm forgetting where I even heard this, but I heard it at some point in high school in some podcast, and it was someone that said, like, you should make your own Bible. Like, put together all of the things that strike true to you, that ring resonant. And I was like, that's such a good idea. So that is something I do. I have both a physical kind of copy of things printed out and like a note on my phone to like write down things when it happens, and I try and make it look pretty, and it's kind of like a witchcraft grimoire-esque, also like Bible, holy text, also like journal and like scrapbook all in one, and it's creative. I get to use stickers, and I also get to flip through it and be reminded of the beautiful words that have changed my life, and media that has changed my life, and people that have changed my life. And Yeah, so that's a spiritual practice that I've really been enjoying too, that I would encourage you to do as well. I'll also say the other spiritual practice I do is this. This very much feels like communion to me in the truest sense of the word, that I am communing with something greater than myself in the way that I believe that we are all bits and pieces of God. You are too. And when we are all together, that is more godliness. It's like to have a little bit of God in me is infinite godness, right? In the way that God has to be infinite. But when we're together, it does feel like even more infinite godliness because there's more of us with God in us. But I'll leave you with this. If you take a cup and dip it into the ocean and you have a glass cup filled with ocean water, is that cup the ocean? Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say that this cup is the ocean, but what's inside of the cup? Ocean water. You wouldn't just say water. It's like, no, there's definitely some ocean in there, but it's not the ocean. The ocean is so much faster. That's kind of how I view us. And I would like to think that while I am in this clear glass form, human being form being the clear glass, experiencing what it's like to be the ocean in this incarnation, that I learn something new, that I get to explore every edge of the ocean that I have been given. And then eventually, once all of that ocean in my clear glass has been explored, I'll be poured back into the big ocean. I hope that I get to take some of my clear glass with me, but I don't know if I do. And I think that hope might come from my ego and the Reese-ness that I feel that I have and am. And maybe once I'm poured back into the ocean, I won't have that need anymore, and that's kind of the final frontier. Or maybe not. I don't know. I, again, just want to reiterate that I have so much respect for Rhett and Link as creators, as friends, as husbands, as dads, as business owners. Like, the model they've created too is deeply inspiring to me. And I think more than anything, I deeply respect their vulnerability, and the way that that speaks through their creative projects is inspiring at the level of like, wow, I want to create something like that. I've always said the best works of art are the ones that make you wish that you had that skill, right? Like, my favorite songs are the ones that make me want to learn to play guitar. My favorite musicals are the ones that make me wish that I could belt. My favorite YouTubers are the ones that make me wish I was that vulnerable. I've always said that. But truly, that is to me just like the foundation of being inspired by something. And it makes me want to learn and grow and then do it and try it and take risks. So a huge thank you to them for putting this out there, being an inspiration to me, and for being a part of my daily routine. Ram Dass says death is like taking off a tight shoe. And Alan Watts says trying to define the self is like trying to bite your own teeth. So I'll be here in my tight shoes and biting my teeth until I see you next time. Thank you so much for being here. And as always, I hope you feel like you are living more coherently. Until next time, love.